The Story of Admiral the Honourable John Byng by Alfred H. Miles. B.Y. John Campbell. The Honourable John Byng was the fourth son of George Viscount Torrington, and was born at his father's seat at Southill, in Bedfordshire, in the year 1704. Showing a strong inclination for the navy, his father took him to sea with him when he was only 13 years old, and so rapid was his promotion that at 23 he was made captain of the Gibraltar frigate, then stationed in the Mediterranean. These were, comparatively speaking, peaceable times, and the record of the next 25 years was one of routine service, honorably performed and rewarded by steady promotion. Towards the end of the year 1755, the British government received intelligence that a powerful armament was equipping in Toulon, which was intended to act against Fort St. Philip. Though the case was urgent, the government took no notice of repeated warnings until at last, on the strong and positive representation of General Blakeney that his garrison must be reinforced if the ministry wished to retain it, they made a tardy and inadequate arrangement to relieve the garrison and protect the island of Minorca. To effect this purpose, it was necessary to send out a fleet and a reinforcement of troops. The command of this fleet they gave to Admiral Byng, whom they promoted to the rank of Admiral of the Blue. The ministers were blamed at the time for appointing Admiral Byng to this command. The service was one of the greatest importance. It required not only great personal courage and professional skill and experience, but also a comprehensive judgment and great activity and zeal, and Admiral Byng, whatever talents he possessed, had never had an opportunity of displaying them. He was, in fact, without that degree of experience which ought to have been regarded as an indispensable requisite in the person entrusted with this command. Moreover, the force placed under his command was inadequate to the service. It consisted only of 10 sail of the line, several of which were not in a proper condition either for fighting or going to sea, and most of them were either short of their complement of men, or manned by crews consisting of young and inexperienced seamen. On Apith, 1756, Admiral Byng sailed from St. Helens, and on May 2nd he arrived at Gibraltar. From this place he wrote a letter to the Admiralty, which is supposed, by reflecting on the conduct of ministers, to have irritated them against him. On May 8th he sailed for Minorca, but having contrary winds, did not make that island until the morning of the 19th, when he saw the English flag still flying on the castle of St. Philip and several bomb batteries playing upon it from the enemy's works. Early in the morning the Admiral dispatched Captain Hervey, in the Phoenix, with the Chesterfield and Dolphin, with orders to reconnoiter the entrance into the harbor, and, if possible, to convey a letter to General Blakeney. Captain Hervey got round the lair and made signals to the garrison for a boat to come off, but without effect, and the Admiral, about this time discovering the French fleet, ordered him to return. At 2 o'clock on the following day Admiral Byng made a signal to bear away 2 points from the wind and engage. Rear Admiral West was then at too great a distance to comply with both these orders. He therefore bore away 7 points from the wind, and with his whole division attacked the enemy with such impetuosity that several of their ships were soon obliged to quit the line. Had Admiral Byng been equally alert, it is most probable that the French fleet would have been defeated and Minorca saved. But the enemy's center keeping their station, and Byng's division not advancing, Admiral West was prevented from pursuing his advantage by the danger of being separated from the rest of the fleet. After engaging about a quarter of an hour, the Intrepid, the sternmost ship of the van, lost her foretopmast, which, according to Byng's account of the action, obliged his whole division to back their sails to prevent their falling foul of each other. But when this matter came to be examined by the court-martial, it appeared that immediately after the signal for engaging, while the van were bearing down upon the enemy, Admiral Byng, in the Ramillies, edged away some points, by which means the Trident and Louisa got to windward of him, and that, in order to bring them again into their stations, he backed his mizzen-top sail, and endeavored to back his main-top sail. This maneuver necessarily retarded all the ships in his division, and gave the enemy time to escape. M. Galissoniere seized the opportunity, and, his ships being clean, he was soon out of danger. The English had in this engagement 42 men killed and 168 wounded, the French 145 wounded and 26 killed. The next morning the Admiral, finding that 3 of his squadron were damaged in their masts, called a council of war, which decided to proceed to Gibraltar. Admiral Byng wrote an account of this engagement, which he sent to the Admiralty, who, after some delay, published it with excisions which materially affected the impression it was likely to produce. Not only were parts of Admiral Byng's letter withheld from the public, but the letter itself, though said to have been received on June 16th, was not inserted in the Gazette till the 26th of that month. The hired writers in the pay of the ministry were instantly set to work to censure his conduct in the most violent and inflammatory language. One fact was particularly pointed out and most strenuously insisted upon as a proof of personal cowardice. From the returns of the killed and wounded on board of the different ships, it appeared that on board the Ramillies, Admiral Byng's own ship, there was not one man either killed or wounded. Sir Edward Hawke and Admiral Saunders were ordered to supersede Mr. Byng, whom they were instructed to send home under arrest. By this time, the popular clamor and indignation were so extremely violent that government were afraid some of it would be directed against themselves, unless they placed it beyond doubt that they were resolved to proceed against Mr. Byng without the least delay, and in the most rigorous manner. The Admiral landed at Portsmouth. At every place that he passed through, he was hooted by the mob. On the road to Greenwich Hospital, where he was to remain until his trial, he was guarded as if he had been guilty of the most heinous crime, while that part of the hospital where he was confined was most scrupulously and carefully fortified, the government taking care that all their precautions to prevent his escape should be made known. On December 27, 1756, the court-martial assembled on board the St. George in Portsmouth Harbor, and on January 15, 1757, the evidence concluded. The opinion of the court was that the admiral did not do his utmost to relieve the garrison of St. Philip, and that during the engagement he did not do his utmost to take, seize, and destroy the ships of the French king, and assist such of his own ships as were engaged. They therefore came to the following resolution: that the admiral appears to fall under the following part of the 12th article of the Articles of War, viz., or shall not do his utmost to take or destroy every ship which it shall be his duty to engage, and to assist and relieve all and every of his Majesty's ships, which it shall be his duty to assist and relieve. And as that article positively prescribes death, without any alternative left to the discretion of the court, under any variation of circumstances, resolved that he be adjudged to be shot to death at such time, and on board such ship, as the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty shall direct. But as it appears by the evidence of Lord Robert Bertie, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, Captain Gardiner, and other officers of the ship, who were near the person of the Admiral, that they did not perceive any backwardness in him during the action, or any marks of fear or confusion, either from his countenance or behavior, but that he seemed to give his orders coolly and distinctly, and did not seem wanting in personal courage. And from other circumstances, the court do not believe that his misconduct arose either from cowardice or disaffection, and do therefore unanimously think it their duty most earnestly to recommend him as a proper object of mercy. Not only in their resolution did the court-martial recommend him to mercy, but in the letter which accompanied a copy of their proceedings to the Board of Admiralty, they expressed themselves strongly to the same effect. Notwithstanding these repeated, strong, and earnest representations of the opinion and wishes of the court-martial, the Lords of the Admiralty contented themselves, when they laid before His Majesty a copy of the proceedings, with transmitting the letters of the court-martial, hinting, indeed, a doubt respecting the legality of the sentence, because the crime of negligence, for which alone Admiral Byng was condemned, did not appear in any part of the proceedings. When the sentence was known, George, Lord Viscount Torrington, a near relation of the Admiral's, presented 2 petitions to His Majesty, and his other friends interested themselves in his behalf. But the people were so clamorous and violent that it would scarcely have been safe to have pardoned him. However, in consequence of the representation of the Lords of the Admiralty respecting the doubtful legality of the sentence, His Majesty referred it to the 12 judges, who were unanimous in their opinion that it was legal. The next step was to transmit this opinion to the Lords of the Admiralty, in order that they might sign the warrant for the execution. All the lords signed it, except Admiral Forbes, who entered his reasons for his refusal. Admiral Forbes was not the only naval officer who resolutely and honorably stood forward and protested against the sentence passed upon Admiral Byng. Mr. West, who had been second in command under him in the Mediterranean, and who on his return was appointed one of the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty, and soon afterwards commander-in-chief of a squadron destined for a secret expedition, on the very day sentence was passed on Admiral Byng, wrote official and private letters, declining these appointments on account of the treatment of Admiral Byng. When the warrant was signed, Mr. Capel, one of the members of the court-martial, rose in his place in the House of Commons, and prayed, on behalf of himself and some other members of the court, that they might be released from their oath of secrecy, in order to disclose the reasons which had induced them to pass sentence of death upon Admiral Byng, as, probably, by this disclosure, some circumstances might come out that would prove the sentence to be illegal. To this the Commons agreed, and an order was sent down to Portsmouth to respite the execution of the Admiral until March 14th. The House of Lords, however, after interrogating the members of the court-martial who were responsible for the bill, unanimously rejected it. On his way to receive sentence on board the St. George, Admiral Byng told some of his friends that he expected to be reprimanded, and possibly he might be cashiered, because, added he, there must have been several controverted points. The court-martial has been shut up a long time, and almost all the questions proposed by the court have tended much more to pick out faults in my conduct than to get a true state of the circumstances. But I profess I cannot conceive what they will fix upon. When he arrived on board the St. George, and as he was walking on the quarterdeck, a member of the court-martial came out and told one of his relations that they had found the admiral capitally guilty, and requested him to prepare him for his sentence. The gentleman to whom this communication was made went up to him immediately, but was unable to address him for some time. His countenance, however, and the embarrassment of his manner, led the admiral to suspect that he had some unpleasant intelligence to communicate, and he said to him, "What is the matter? Have they broke me?" The gentleman, perceiving from this question that he was totally unprepared for his sentence, hesitated still more, upon which the countenance of the admiral changed a little, and he added, "Well, I understand. If nothing but my blood will satisfy, let them take it." A few minutes afterwards, one of his friends endeavored to support and reconcile him to his fate, by observing that a sentence without guilt could be no stain, and adding that it was extremely unlikely that the sentence would be carried into execution, begged him to indulge the hope of obtaining a pardon. He replied, "What will that signify to me? What satisfaction can I receive from the liberty to crawl a few years longer on the earth with the infamous load of a pardon at my back? I despise life upon such terms, and would rather have them take it." When the respite for 14 days came down to Portsmouth, his friends endeavored to encourage the expectation that he would be honorably pardoned, and dwelt upon every circumstance which gave countenance and probability to this idea. To them he replied, in a calm and unembarrassed manner, "I am glad you think so, because it makes you easy and happy. But I think it has now become an affair merely political, without any relation to right or wrong, justice or injustice, and therefore I differ in opinion from you." Immediately after he received his sentence, he was put on board the Monarch, a third-rate man-o'-war, lying at anchor in the harbor of Portsmouth, under a strong guard, in the custody of the Marshal of the Admiralty. On Sunday morning, March 13th, Captain Montague, who had received the warrant from Admiral Boscawen for his execution next day, gave it to the Admiral for him to read. He read it over without the slightest sign of perturbation, and then remarked with some warmth that the place named in the warrant for his execution was upon the forecastle, a circumstance which evidently filled his mind with indignation. His friends endeavored to turn his thoughts from this idea. They could not indeed hold out to him the expectation that the place would be changed, because the warrant expressly named it. They coincided with him in the opinion that it ought not to have been so. But they trusted, at this awful and important moment, he would deem such a circumstance beneath his notice, and not suffer it to break in upon the tranquillity of his mind. On this he composed his thoughts and feelings, and replied, "It is very true, the place or manner is of no great importance to me, but I think living admirals should consult the dignity of the rank for their own sakes. I cannot plead a precedent. There is no precedent of an admiral or a general officer in the army being shot. They make a precedent of me, such as admirals hereafter may feel the effects of." During the time he was at dinner, no alteration in his manner was observable. He was cheerful and polite, helping his friends and drinking their healths, but he did not continue long at table. After dinner, he conversed a good deal respecting his approaching execution, and the indignation and uneasiness he had before felt about the place appointed for it recurred with considerable force in his thoughts. His friends were extremely desirous of conversing on other subjects, and at length, perceiving this, he remarked, "I like to talk upon the subject. It is not to be supposed I do not think of it. Why then should it be more improper to talk of it?" He frequently noticed how the wind was, and on his friends inquiring the reason of his anxiety on this subject, He said he hoped it might continue westerly long enough for the members of the court-martial, who were just about to sail, to be present when his sentence was put in execution. About 6 o'clock, according to his usual custom, he ordered tea, and while he and his friends were at it, his conversation was easy and cheerful, perceiving that his friends were astonished at this circumstance. "I have observed," said he, "that persons condemned to die have generally had something to be sorry for that they have expressed concern for having committed. And though I do not pretend to be exempt from human frailties, yet it is my consolation to have no remorse for any transaction in my public character during the whole series of my long services." On one of his friends observing that no man was exempt from human frailties, and that what came under that denomination were not crimes cognizable here, or supposed to be so hereafter, he replied, "I am conscious of no crimes, and am particularly happy in not dying the mean, despicable, ignominious wretch my enemies would have the world to believe me. I hope I am not supposed so now. The court-martial has acquitted me of everything criminal or ignominious." One of his friends assured him that none called or thought him so but persons who were obstinately prejudiced against him, and his enemies, whose interest and design it was to deceive the nation, and it was vain to expect that they would be induced to change their opinion or do him justice by any reasoning or statement. This observation seemed to please him much. In the evening he ordered a small bowl of punch to be made, and as all his friends were seated round the table, taking his own glass with a little punch in it, after having helped his friends, he said, "My friends, here is all your healths, and God bless you. I am pleased to find I have some friends still, notwithstanding my misfortunes." After drinking his glass, he added, "I am to die tomorrow, and as my country requires my life, I am ready to resign it, though I do not as yet know what my crime is. I think my judges, in justice to posterity, to officers who come after us, should have explained my crime a little more, and pointed out the way to avoid falling into the same errors I did. As the sentence and resolutions stand now, I am persuaded no admiral will be wiser hereafter by them, or know better how to conduct himself on the like occasion." Observing one or his friends with his eyes attentively fixed upon him while he was speaking, "My friend," said he, "I understand reproof in that grave look. It is a long time since I have spoken so much upon the subject, and you now think I say too much. Perhaps I do so." "Far from presuming to mean any reproof," replied his friend, "I am all attention to what you say, sir, and though all of us here are satisfied of these truths, yet we must be pleased to hear you make them plainer." The admiral was always watched in the great cabin during the night by officers who relieved one another at 12 at night and at 4 o'clock in the morning. At these hours he was seldom found awake, but the night before his execution at both hours he was found in a tranquil and profound sleep. He had always been in the habit of rising very early, and while he was on board the Monarch, he used to banter the marshal for not being up so soon as he was. On Monday morning, the day of his execution, he was up by 5 o'clock. The marshal did not make his appearance till 6, and when he saw him, "Well," said he, "I think I have beat you at rising this morning." Soon afterwards, when he was shifting, as he regularly did every morning, "Here," said he to his valet, "take these sleeve buttons and wear them for my sake. Yours will do to be buried with." As soon as he was dressed, he returned to the stateroom by himself, where he spent some time. On coming out, he sat down to breakfast with the marshal as composedly as usual. He was dressed in a light gray coat, white waistcoat and white stockings, and a large white wig. These clothes he had regularly worn since he received the intelligence of his suspension at Gibraltar, for after having read the order, he stripped off his uniform and threw it into the sea. About 9 o'clock, his friends came on board the Monarch. He received them in an easy, familiar manner, took each of them by the hand, and inquired after their health. They informed him that the place of his execution was changed, that it was not to take place on the forecastle, but on the quarterdeck. This intelligence seemed to give him great satisfaction. He had constantly declared his resolution to die with his face uncovered, and to give the word of command to the platoon of Marines himself, saying, "As it is my fate, I can look at it and receive it." His friends were grieved at this determination and endeavored to dissuade him from it. Sometimes he seemed disposed to comply with their wishes, but at other times he replied, "No, it cannot be, I cannot bear it. I must look and receive my fate." His friends, however, persevered in representing to him that, considering his rank, it was impossible the Marines could receive the word of command from him, or look in his face and see him looking at them without being intimidated and awed. They hinted also at the consequences which might result, that he might be wounded only and mangled. By arguments and entreaties, they at length prevailed upon him to have a bandage over his eyes, and to make a signal by dropping a handkerchief. He then requested to be made acquainted with all the particulars of the form, in order that he might conduct himself strictly according to them, remarking that he had never been present at an execution. As soon as the admiral had agreed upon the signal he was to make, it was communicated to the commanding officer of the Marines, in order that he might instruct his men accordingly. And he was also desired to tell them that they should have 10 guineas if they conducted themselves properly. The Marines were drawn up, under arms, upon the poop, along the gangways in the waist and on one side of the quarterdeck. A heap of sawdust was thrown on the other side of the quarterdeck, and a cushion placed upon it. In the middle upon the gratings, a platoon of 9 Marines were drawn up in 3 lines, 3 in each. The 2 foremost lines, which were intended to fire, had their bayonets fixed, as is customary on such occasions. Orders had been given for all the men of war at Spithead to send their boats, with the captains and all the officers of each ship, accompanied by a party of Marines under arms, to attend the execution. In compliance with these orders, they rowed from Spithead and made the harbor a little after 11 o'clock, but with great difficulty and danger, as it blew a dreadful gale at west-northwest and the tide was ebbing. Notwithstanding the state of the weather, there was a prodigious number of other boats present. About 11 o'clock, Admiral Byng, walking across his cabin, and observing the crowd of boats out of one of the cabin windows, took up a glass to view them more distinctly. The decks, shrouds, and yards of all the ships that lay near were crowded with men, upon which he remarked, "Curiosity is strong. It draws a great number of people together, but their curiosity will be disappointed. Where they are, they may hear, but they cannot see." A gentleman said to him, "To see you so easy and composed, sir, gives me as much pleasure as I can have on this occasion, but I expected no less from the whole of your conduct heretofore, and the last actions of a man mark his character more than all the actions of his life." "I am sensible they do, sir," replied he, "and am obliged to you for putting me in mind. I find innocence is the best foundation for firmness of mind." He continued to walk about in the cabin for some time, inquired what time it would be high water, observed that the tide would not suit to carry his body ashore after dark, expressed some apprehensions that his body might be insulted if it were carried ashore in the daytime, on account of the prejudices of the people against him. But his friends assuring him that there was no such disposition among the inhabitants of Portsmouth, he appeared very well satisfied. He walked out of the great cabin to the quarterdeck, accompanied by a clergyman who had attended him during his confinement and 2 gentlemen, his relations. One of these went with him to the cushion and offered to tie the bandage over his eyes, but he, having a white handkerchief ready folded in his hand, replied with a smile on his countenance, "I am obliged to you, sir. I thank God I can do it myself. I think I can, I am sure I can," and tied it behind his head himself. He continued upon his knees rather more than a minute, much composed, and apparently recommending himself to the Almighty, and then dropped his handkerchief. The signal agreed upon, a few minutes before 12 o'clock. On this a volley was fired from the 6 Marines, 5 of whose bullets went through him, and he was in an instant no more. The 6th bullet went over his head. The spectators were amazed at the intrepidity of his behavior, and scarcely could refrain from tears. One of the common seamen, who had stood all the time full of attention with his arms across, cried out with enthusiasm, when he saw him fall, "There lies the bravest and best officer of the Navy." A few minutes before his execution, he delivered to the Marshal of the Admiralty the following paper, addressing himself to him in these words: "Sir, these are my thoughts on this occasion. I give them to you that you may authenticate them and prevent anything spurious being published that might tend to defame me. I have given a copy to one of my relations. A few moments will now deliver me from the virulent persecutions and frustrate the farther malice of my enemies. Nor need I envy them a life subject to the sensations my injuries and the injustice done me must create. Persuaded, I am, justice will be done to my reputation hereafter. The manner and cause of raising and keeping up the popular clamor and prejudice against me will be seen through. I shall be considered, as I now perceive myself, a victim destined to divert the indignation and resentment of an injured and deluded people from the proper objects. My enemies themselves must now think me innocent. Happy for me, at this my last moment, that I know my own innocence, and am conscious that no part of my country's misfortunes can be owing to me. I heartily wish the shedding my blood may contribute to the happiness and service of my country, but cannot resign my just claim to a faithful discharge of my duty, according to the best of my judgment, and the utmost exertion of my ability for His Majesty's honor and my country's service. I am sorry that my endeavors were not attended with more success, and that the armament under my command proved proved too weak to succeed in an expedition of such moment. Truth has prevailed over calumny and falsehood, and justice has wiped off the ignominious stain of my supposed want of personal courage or disaffection. My heart acquits me of these crimes, but who can be presumptuously sure of his own judgment? If my crime is an error of judgment, or differing in opinion from my judges, and if yet the error in judgment should be on their side, God forgive them, as I do, and may the distress of their minds and uneasiness of their consciences, which in justice to me they have represented, be believed and subside, as my resentment has done. The Supreme Judge sees all hearts and motives, and to him I must submit the justice of my cause. In his parish church at Southill is the following inscription to the memory of this unfortunate officer.